In 1993, the Wall Street Journal called Texas the lawsuit capital of the world. Our state had a reputation as a place to get rich, not by starting a business, but by suing one.
Well, the tort environment in Texas was obviously horrible. I mean, it had been named one of the most plaintiff-friendly places in the country. And it was actually, people were just making gobs of money off of filing lawsuits, a lot of them frivolous lawsuits.
Tort is a fancy term for when one person sues someone else or a business, essentially a civil lawsuit. It's likely the case that you've never been sued, but can you imagine starting a business only to have it destroyed by someone looking for a quick payday? Or let's say you need to see a doctor or OBGYN, but you can't because they're fleeing the state, fearing malpractice litigation. That was the reality in Texas in the 1970s and 80s. Enter Texans for Lawsuit Reform, or TLR, a group founded in 1994 to end the out-of-control legal environment in the state. Thanks to George W. Bush's victory in his campaign for governor that same year, TLR saw massive success in passing reforms, like limiting damaging punitive awards. And when Republicans finally gained control of the Texas House in 2003, TLR achieved even better results.
And we basically changed the state over the first maybe 15 years. And we've had a very strong pro-business state ever since.
In just over a decade, TLR had largely put an end to the abusive litigation Texas was known for. But according to former supporters, that's when they lost their way. Lately, the powerful group has worked against conservatives in Austin and citizens who expect the state to be governed according to the will of the voters. In this season of Exposed, we'll introduce you to TLR, a group that against all odds boldly defeated the corrupt power brokers ruling Texas, only to see themselves become the very thing they were created to stop. From Texas Scorecard, I'm Valerie Munoz, and this is Exposed, the Beast of Austin.
Is justice for sale in Texas?
TLR, I think, can crown itself with the laurel that they are responsible for taking a legal system and turning it into the model.
I think because of their power and their ability to raise lots of money from very wealthy people in Texas, they view themselves as invincible.
It's morphed into a beast of Austin.
I think Texas for Lawsuit Reform has long since passed its prime. It is on another path. It should just go away.
It's been said that the Texas miracle was kind of a stool built with three legs. Low business taxes, a predictable regulatory environment, and a sensible tort system.
In the 1970s and 80s, Texas had low taxes and relative stability in the regulatory environment. But the third leg of the stool was missing. The courts were in turmoil.
Opposed to being the Texas miracle, which people look at Texas now, was really the Texas disaster. Doctors leaving the state, retiring early, economy's not expanding. Lloyd's of London charged an extra 20-25% just for the pleasure of doing business in Texas, and it was a disaster.
That's the voice of Dick Weekly, a founder of TLR, describing the environment in the early 1990s during a podcast appearance. It was 1994 when Weekly set his mind to reforming rampant legal abuse in Texas.
So I heard all this data and said, this is crazy. So then I talked to a bunch of my colleagues. I said, are you having these problems? And everybody started, saying they had incredible problems, started telling stories. And so I had a meeting of about 60 guys and to hear these stories, and the stories kept coming out, and I said, we need to go fix it. And everybody laughed and said, no, you can't fix it. The plaintiff trial lawyers own the legislature, own a lot of the courts, no way to fix it. And I said, this is nuts.
The plaintiff lawyers did own the courts. And if it wasn't clear by the large wins being awarded, it was in bold relief on TV screens in 1987 when famous trial lawyer Joe DeMaio appeared on 60 Minutes. In the segment, the lawyer was shown palling around with Texas Supreme Court Justice Oscar Mausey, bragging about a $25,000 campaign donation. This was after the court awarded DeMaio a $10.5 billion verdict in Pennzoil v. Texaco. In today's money, that's a $26 billion verdict. and the trial lawyer who won was schmoozing up and boasting about donating to the judges who made the ruling. Here's part of that 60 Minutes interview.
Is justice for sale in Texas? Some recent headlines might make you wonder. The Wall Street Journal has called the decision of one Texas court a national embarrassment. The New York Times editorialized that the conduct of the Texas courts is reminiscent of what passes for justice in small countries run by colonels in mirrored sunglasses.
Here's Weekly again.
So I came back to Houston and started recruiting some of my colleagues to help. Leo Lindbeck was an early partner, Dick Trabolsi, Hugh Kelly, who's General Counsel of Chiefs Lighting Power. And then Leo and I started traveling the state in Walter Mischer's plane, essentially for about 9 months, recruiting the Texas business leadership, and which we did. And then everybody said that you'll be lucky if you pass one bill, you have to negotiate with the trial lawyers. And I finally said, if I'm going to take my time away from my wife, my family, my workouts and come to Austin, I wasn't going to work on one bill. I was going to work on a whole slew of them. Not doing any better. We proposed 8 bills. So, it's good to be naive on certain of these things. I was totally naive and never been involved in anything like this before, but I went to Austin to talk to everybody who had been working on this project for about 20, 30 years. And there's not a one of them that said we could do anything. And so we went to the legislature and we proposed 8 bills, which again, everybody laughed at, said you never pass any of them. We ended up passing all 8 of them.
TLR, with their bold vision for reform, arrived on the political scene at the right time. George W. Bush, when he was elected governor in 1994, ran on a platform that included overhauling the Texas civil justice system.
And I have a plan to expand the job base of our state so that any person who wants a job in the state of Texas will be able to find one. And it rests on this basic principle. So long as we have a lost system, a tort system that threatens our producers and providers and risk takers with frivolous and junk lawsuits, we will not have the job growth in the private sector that we want.
In 1995, TLR successfully lobbied, and Bush signed into law a bill to end venue shopping. Here's Weekly talking about the issue.
Something happens in Dallas, she ends up trying a case down in the Valley. Products liability, punitive damages. Every lawsuit turns into punitive damages.
Venue shopping was common in Texas during the state's era of lawlessness. Even if everything about an incident took place in Dallas, people suing would do so in faraway courts that were more likely to rule in their favor. According to Texas Monthly, venue laws were so loose in Texas, a case with only the most tenuous connection to the state or the county could still be tried in that locale, regardless of where the alleged wrongdoing had occurred. A crazy example of this is the case of Costa Rican banana plantation workers. Even though they were hurt in another country, they sued in Texas and won. After big early wins in 1995, the established power brokers in Austin started fighting back, and TLR hit a rough patch. In the next several sessions, the group's plans were met with resistance. Here's political commentator Luke Macias talking about how the group was viewed.
And honestly, they were the people that you couldn't really be associated with, right? If you were a politician and you were working with TLR, you were an outsider. You were working against the established order. You were working against the existing hierarchy or regime.
Because there were still political outsiders in the Capitol in the late 1990s, the tone and tenor of their work was hyperbolic and very public. Something that will change. Near the end of the 1997 session, TLR's newsletter blared, "Tort reform dies." Texans for Public Justice, a key critic of TLR, reported that the group was playing defense by 2001, but their luck would soon change.
They seem to have become effective about the time I got in office because we passed tort reform my first session. They were clearly a big player.
That's Ken Paxton, the current Attorney General of Texas. In 2003, he was a new member of the Texas House, and that session was going to be a big year for TLR. Here's Trey Traynor, an attorney and current federal elections commissioner, talking about that legislative session.
Well, 2003 is when the Republicans took over in the House for the first time since Reconstruction. And given that they had promised the voters that they were going to do tort reform, it was critical for them to bring a tort reform bill to the floor. It's one of the longest debated bills that the legislature's ever seen.
In 2013, Texas Monthly wrote that in 2003, TLR had, quote, reached total victory, unquote. By then, the legislature had passed a slate of reforms that went far beyond limiting excessive rewards, to the point of deterring Texans from pursuing legal action in all but the most egregious circumstances. While TLR would eventually write a letter to the editor, pushing back on the characterization of citizens being effectively cut off from the courts, they didn't push back on the sentiment that the group had achieved total victory. Here's then Governor Rick Perry reflecting on that session.
At that time, the plaintiffs had declared open season on doctors. Number of frivolous lawsuits were skyrocketing. Doctors in Texas were facing a crisis as insurance companies either were raising their rates prohibitively or they just simply quit insuring Texas doctors altogether. Doctors were faced with the difficult decisions of either leaving Texas or leaving medicine altogether. Not only did doctors stop leaving Texas, they started flowing back into this state at unprecedented rates.
The victories achieved by TLR and their impact on Texas cannot be overstated. Here's Mark Pulliam, an attorney and former TLR supporter, talking about the group's success.
It's very complicated, and it required persistence, required huge amounts of resources, required a certain amount of vision that a lot of businessmen and lawyers don't have. So it was a strategy that didn't happen overnight. The people, the founders of TLR, Hugh Rice Kelly in particular, who was a very accomplished lawyer, they were visionaries, and they saw what needed to be done and put together all the pieces and got it done.
Throughout the series, you'll hear the voice of one TLR founder, Dick Weekly, taken from interviews he's given over the years. In early January, Texas Scorecard asked TLR's leadership team if they would be interviewed for our series. They declined to take part. In the next episode, we'll explore TLR's key personnel and recent efforts to work against conservatives, often against their own stated interests of limiting lawsuit abuse in Texas. Thank you for listening to this episode of Exposed. We'd like to thank Luke Macias, Mark Pulliam, Ken Paxton, and Trey Trainer for participating in interviews featured in this podcast.
Exposed is a product of Texas Scorecard, the leading source on government and culture in Texas. For more information, go to texasscorecard.com.